Yeah, well, I wouldn't say Tales games. The theory that all the Tales from the Pizza stories, or at the very least ones connected back to the Mimic plotline, is confirmed, despite the growing loud chunk of the fanbase that claims it is. Is it debunked? Well, that'd be an awesome thumbnail, but I don't think so. It's more so that I feel there are a lot of problems that prevent it from being truly confirmed. Confirmed to me means truly undeniable, like it is core information we can build off of. And Tales games is just a very plausible theory, and I want to talk about why it has so many problems that I don't believe it can enter that undeniable fact level just yet. So first things first, there's just some random things I want to talk about, but they're not really major things. Just weird descriptions, some things that may or may not be errors. Things like the one time Chica was mentioned as being yellow, and there's like the whole thing, oh, there's some textures where it looks like she was repainted. That's not really implied in the main story, especially since we never see any version of the band that isn't the glam rock. That was a theory prior to Ruin, but now that we see glam rock Bonnie, called glam rock Bonnie, we don't have much proof. There's also no, like, reason for that, really? Like, what's that supposed to imply or hint at? There's the ever-prevalent thing of like, oh, this attraction's in the books and not in the games, which was pretty justifiable with the whole like, oh, they take everything down and put it away. But now that we have Foxy's log ride, which hasn't been mentioned thus far in the Tales from the Pizza Block stories, now that we have a kind of behind-the-scenes ruined look at everything, and including new areas, we still don't see much, if any, of these attractions, which just further brings them into question. Like, you're telling me Lally's entire thing, Tiger Rock's AR stuff, the entire storyteller tree, the roleplay area, the VR booths, and a goddamn roller coaster, and it might imply something about the writing of Scholastic, but I'll get into that towards the end of the video. But then we get two of the weirder errors. One I've already talked to death about, but I will briefly go over here. It's the Mr. Hippo Magnet. In the actual base game Security Breach, you get the Hippo Magnet as a sort of like entryway gift that happens to mess with an already buggy machine. And there's no extra dialogue about it being discontinued or anything, but in the Bobby Dots, which is supposed to be before Security Breach, because after Security Breach, apparently we enter Ruin, the magnet is discontinued and thrown in the trash. That's really just a continuity error that could just be a mistake in theory. There's one error that I've never seen anyone really talk about that really bugs me. According to Theo, one of the kind of engineers, workers at Fazbear's who's unpacking everything for the Pizzaplex, when he's looking at what's later revealed to be the Mimic for the first time, Theo says, well, they're going to need another guitarist. Which just raises the question, what? So, let me restate the description of the Mimic from this story. Its steel frame contained a bulging collection of metal rods and curved plates and an impressive system of ball joints and pistons. All of this topped with a long, vaguely rectangular-shaped, shiny steel skull. The skull was the only part of the endoskeleton that was shiny. The rest was dark and discolored, as if it had survived some kind of fire. The upper part of the shiny skull contained bulging white eyes encased in steel sockets, and the lower parts contained a hinged, metal-toothed mouth. Jutting from the top of the head, a pair of bent metal ears stuck out like antennae. So, there's a lot to unpack there. So, not only is this a bare endoskeleton, unlike the others that are kind of described as having their shells, or at least implied to have their shells, they just somehow know this is supposed to be the guitarist, I guess. But here's why that's really strange. So, as far as the first ever teasers for Security Breach, and even in the first trailers of Security Breach, where we can see this a little bit better, Chica has always had a 6-string guitar. And Monty has always had a bass, which has 4 strings. This is important because Ruin and the base game of Security Breach both emphasize how Bonnie was the prior bass player with special claws that were transferred to Monty once Bonnie was decommissioned, or destroyed, or whatever happened. We're still kind of unclear on those details. Point is, he looks like this now when Monty's on stage. Why that's important here is because there is no guitarist with ears. Chica is the guitarist. I don't know what happened here. My only conclusion is that the writers of this story didn't have good descriptions of where the Mimic plotline were going, and just saw that it had ears and were like, oh yeah, that Bonnie guy from our original book series that we wrote, he was a guitarist, right? Or something like that. But like, if they did know where this was all going, which they really should by all accounts, considering that Security Breach had 3 years of development and all these stories are coming out relatively quickly, I don't know how they this up, because the Mimic has no connections directly to guitars in any way. Hey, This is me in editing. Funny little story, I forgot Tiger Rock has a guitar. And he does have ears. The problem being that we're never told there was an original Tiger Rock animatronic before everything else. So that still doesn't really solve the problem, but if the implication here is that Tiger Rock was supposed to be a starting member of the cast, and the Mimic gets replaces it, or something happens like that, that kind of works, because the Mimic does have a deep connection with the whole white tiger. Or I guess he's kind of pink, actually, if you look at the art, but he's mostly supposed to be a white tiger kind of motif indeed. And he has a guitar, and he's connected to the Mimic. That said, I stand by almost all of this entire section and argument I have here still, because that's not really explained at all in the stories. But hey, I thought I'd point it out. It only has loose connections to Bonnie. That's only under theories where the Mimic interacts with Glamrock Bonnie in some way. And Bonnie's not a guitarist, once again. There is the whole, oh, is Mimic Burntrap and vice versa theory, but at best, Burntrap could be compared to Spring Bonnie, who is not a guitarist. I know I make that whole thing in Freddy and Friends newspaper that Spring Bonnie's a guitarist, but trust me, it was a shock to me to learn that Spring Bonnie never once has been officially depicted with a guitar to my knowledge. So I really have no clue what the happened here. Because it's not like they were looking at the design of Burntrap, because Burntrap has a shell and several defining features that are not mentioned here, including his weird metal rib cage that comes straight out of Springtrap, or his metal spine that comes out of the Nightmares. Or, all the goddamn skin on him! This is a side point I might want to talk about more at length in another video, but the Mimic and Burntrap have so many frustrating connections and then not connections and direct contradictions between the two. To cover it very quickly, as I went into exhaustive detail in these two little videos I just recorded on the spot, Burntrap has basically nothing in common with Mimic other than one hand and the fact that he has ball joints on his arms, which aren't even the same design, but I mean, not every M-Tronic has though, even though it is a somewhat common design trait. Other than that, only their behaviors overlap, and it's this isn't even redesign standards, people say oh, Roxy has a new face. Why are you complaining that Mimic and Burntrap look different? Roxy is still recognizably a torn-up wolf animatronic. You can still see a lot of her core traits, like the ears and hair and tail and her base costume and outfit. There's no real arguing that isn't Roxy. And even one of the other extreme examples in the series, Springtrap and Scraptrap, they're still both recognizably greenish corpse rabbits. There are differences between the two, design-wise, that are pretty obvious and noticeable and pretty significant. But you can't argue they aren't supposed to represent the same general concept, because they clearly are. Whereas you look at these two and almost all of Burntrap's defining traits are missing. However, for this description to match the game Mimic, they would need to be the same character. But it just doesn't work between these two. It's like they saw the Mimic and Burntrap separately and were like, nah, same character, and just gave them descriptions from both. It doesn't have the shiny metal head that it's supposed to have according to the story. It doesn't even have the damn rabbit ears. The only antenna-like rabbit ears character would be Burntrap. And he is definitively scorched. It's in his name, Burntrap. But then you have the fact that, like I said, nothing about their designs are the same, and you can't see the Mimic wearing the costume. The Mimic can't just turn invisible to our knowledge. We should still see, its chunks of its endoskeleton wearing the Springlock suit of Springtrap. And once again, the Mimic isn't burnt and doesn't have ears, so it needs to be connected to Burntrap for this description to work. But then you have the fact of why isn't it like that anymore? Why would the Mimic, take a bath and rip off its ears before ruin, just to be different? That's one of my huge problems with the whole, oh, Burntrap is what the Mimic will become should the Afton ending happen, but we're not in the Afton ending timeline. And then it's the fact that the Mimic has what looks like part of Burntrap's costume on its face, which implies it was Burntrap at some point. Don't know how that happened, which just further puts a nail in the coffin that the Mimic somehow becomes Burntrap in an alternate timeline. It also means it isn't just a pure retcon, because some of that still existed if that is part of Burntrap's costume. Also, if the whole idea is he's going for his Afton cosplay, why did he just give up? He already had two of the pieces. In fact, he had a human he could have worn, according to the Tales from the Pizza stories, and I guess he just washed her off. Where's the Mimic bath arc? And that's just the beginning of the Mimic shenanigans. Because that's just talk about the Mimic and Burntrap being kind of described as the same character, despite in practice, in game, not looking at all alike and having very weird connections. Anyway, that's like I said, a lot of that's kind of an argument for another video, but what isn't an argument for another video is the fact that the Mimic's design just fucking is different at times in the books. For no reason, really. I'm going to read another excerpt, and I want you to remember this is what the endoskeleton is supposed to look like. And I want you to imagine how the we get this description with this character design. Creeping out of the back of the overall-clad mushroom was an abomination of twisted and contorted metal. The abomination was a mass of metal joints and wires that shaped into something vaguely resembling a mutated spider. With one of its eyes on one leg and the other on its back, the frightened spider had 9 legs instead of the spider's usual 8. One of the legs extended from where its mouth should have been. The leg pulsed through the air like a proboscis seeking something to suck into the scuttling creature's bowels. Unlike the Mimic's footfalls when it was upright, this configuration of the Mimic's parts made a tss, tss sound. A sloppy ticking that was much, much worse than the tap, tap. The sound made every hair on Lucia's body stand on end. It nearly drove her instantaneously mad. Kelly must have felt the same way. She suddenly made a run for it. Lucia opened her mouth to shout, "No!" But the self-preservation stopped the word from coming out. The thing scooting across the floor might have looked like an alien insect, but it was the Mimic, and the Mimic could hear. If Lucia shouted, she'd give herself away. But once again, look at what this is supposed to look like. How does Extendo Limboy, with the goddamn extendy lightsaber telescopic arms, become a fucking spider with an eye on its leg? It doesn't even have, like, joints to spread out into multiple legs, much less 9, one of which is a proboscis scooting through the air to stab things. How? How does its eye move to its leg? I'm looking at this thing from every goddamn angle and I can't figure out where it starts and ends. How do we get the metal spider? It doesn't even make sense plot context-wise. Edwin just grabbed some random unfinished endoskeleton and installed a high-grade AI on it. And then some random technicians trying to salvage stuff out of Edwin's workshop just stuck legs on it. Why doesn't it have, like, flawless shape-shifting powers? I get the whole arm extension thing, and maybe its legs can do it too. Maybe this was just general stuff Edwin was working on that got caught up in the process. But this is, like, another level. And this is never talked about in the original Edwin story, which makes me wonder, is this supposed to be a mass-produced Mimic? Or is this the original Mimic? If it's not the original Mimic, where the f*** is he? Is that the one in Ruin? If the one in Ruin isn't the one in this scene, what the f***? I'm just so baffled with how this description got by if they're supposed to be in the same continuity. If this is just a separate continuity thing where Scholastic felt like doing their own thing with the base character design and like, yeah, we can say it does that, that makes a bit more sense. Hey, me and editing once more. I forgot to mention one of the other kind of counterpoints and complaints I had about the Mimic, which is, in the short stories, the lion costume it wears, that a lot of people are linking to the lion costume it wears in Ruin, are just different. The one it wears in the Tales verse is a purplish gray and is in Edwin's lab and has no mentioning of its whole, like, track jacket, sort of sports jock kind of look to it. I thought I'd throw that in there because either that means this is another error where the color is messed up in the lion costume, or this is just a coincidence that happens to be another lion costume. Which, to be fair, if you think about it, if Steel was just picking random animal mascots to make their whole, like, silo out of, I mean, inevitably, at least 1 or 2 of them would overlap with whatever Scholastic's animals are randomly picking, especially since Scholastic has so many animals they pick in the Tales verse. And then there's Edwin. Edwin is stuck in a weird place here because he's credited as working on some of the iconic original characters. A fox, a chicken, a bear, a bunny. But then there's some weird stuff with that because we have Henry in the series. To quote Henry, and this is an Insanity Ending rant where it's largely agreed upon, this is about Follow Me, by the way. Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purposes and used in ways I never thought imaginable. So he's taking credit for the classic animatronics in some way. And that creates the problem of, did Edwin create those, or did he create separate animatronics? I mean, under Mimic DCI, this does still work. Edwin just creates the toy animatronics instead of creating the originals. But it's just another thing where it's like, okay, if they ever confirm Edwin made the classic animatronics, that's just a retcon or a continuity error. Or Edwin is just the creator of the classics in this short story continuity. which would make it a lot easier for the writers to explain the Mimic's origin story and backstory if they have an original character they have that they can explain it all with. Or option 4. So follow me on a bit of a theory here. What if Tales Games is canon, but Scholastic and Steel Wool just lack the communication standards to make this connection and built universe work? We know for a fundamental fact that Scholastic's writers on various projects that are presented as official or definitive information have some still pretty present and prevalent errors that can lead to a lot of weird misinformation and weird interpretations. So that makes me wonder, why would their short stories be any different? Let's say, for the hypothetical of this theory, that Steel or Scott are occasionally checking in on them and approving things, but only with the so-so, not-so-fine-tooth comb that the Character Encyclopedia and Ultimate Guide were made with. And Scholastic is just kind of writing whatever they need with complete free reign in the prior to main game chunk of time, filling out whatever, however they want, as long as it doesn't directly contradict something that happens in the base game too obviously. That would explain so many of the random little mistakes, like the guitarist, the hippo magnet, the fact that the Mimic grows 9 spider legs. This would also explain the whole, oh, we take down attractions whenever they're dysfunctional in the books, because that is an easy out for them to be able to write in whatever they want with ease without having to worry about contradicting the base game. Also explain why everything is so asymmetrical in storytelling. Like, the Tales books do a decent job of acknowledging things from the base game's verse, debatably if there actually are the game events or not, but whatever. The point is, it's close enough where you could argue it is, but the games typically don't follow suit the other direction. There are so many things from the short stories that are never acknowledged in Security Breach or Ruin. Important, very prevalent things that really should be there, or at least if they are trying to be connected and intertwined, it should be more obviously hinted at or alluded to, even just in passing. And they never are. If there's all this content and story and all these details that Steel will have written out, and that they are giving to Scholastic, but they are not looking to Scholastic's pool of information back the same way, that would explain why everything is so one-sided. But to me, I think it is important to think about how they would be canon in terms of, like, what is going on development-wise, you know? I think presenting it as, oh, they're collaborating to build up this grand, big story that you need the books for, is kind of misleading because the quality and inconsistency of these stories just doesn't portray that Scott or Steel are consistently stepping in to make things work that way. I don't really think the Tales books are canon. I mean, they might be. It's not a bad theory at all. But I don't think it's even remotely close to being true, confirmed territory of information. I think that's a really important distinction to make, because when you say something's confirmed, you can build off of that solidly. But if it is not solidly confirmed, then we are prone to error. Even if the gist ends up being right, saying an exact interpretation or concept is confirmed just leads to more muddying details. And if it's outright wrong, then it makes this frustrating cycle when we are trying to develop things. Something very hypocritical and frustrating about this whole thing is that while a lot of the diehard Tales games people are saying that channels like Game Theory and FNaF are denying the truth or just ignorant or arrogant, I mean, if Tales Games is wrong, then this is the same thing happening. Just as people are getting mad at a lot of mainstream theorists for not treating Tales as directly in the continuity of the games, just as Parallels is a theory that these big channels are really relying on and believing in, Tales Games is the same. You can argue it has more evidence or is a better theory, but it is still a theory at the end of the day. My final kind of rant I want to throw in here that I don't really have anywhere else to put and I don't want to make its own video is that if Tales Games is true, there is one of the worst missed opportunities in the entire franchise. Helpy should have been Tiger Rock. Because, I mean, god damn it. Helpy does this, like, whole thing throughout the game where he switches in and out of, like, being kind of the correct engineer's guide and assistant, Cortana style, and going into the more corrupted Mimic personality. And we have a goddamn white tiger tying back to the Mimic's whole backstory, and that the Mimic is directly controlling, who switches in and out of the intended mascot personality and the controlled, manipulated, violent personality, who has heterochromia, which could symbolize the dichotomy between the two personalities, tying into everything while confirming the connection to the books. And also, it's a fun new character to make merch off of and connect to your book that came out in a reasonable time frame from the DLC that has this whole scene. Which means everyone was like, oh, I don't know this Tiger Rock guy, and the latest book has him on the cover. I want to read that book to know about Tiger Rock more. You had that great opportunity for merch and book sales, and you passed it up. You have a literal two-faced predator. How did you not make him the manipulative AI tricking you? Then again, my whole theory that Scholastic and Steel will just suck at working together would fit this narrative if Steel Wool didn't know that much about Tiger Rock at all. Anyway, bye.